I once taught meditation retreat. I've mentioned about how to meditate and make the mind very peaceful and still, even how to attain these beautiful lights called nimitta and jhanas. And now I wanted to talk about insight, because many people always ask you, you can make the mind peaceful, but what about insight? And as I was taught and as I understand the sutras taught by the Buddha, insight and calm always go together. So my teacher would often hold up his hand and say, now you can see the front of my hand, but the back is right there too. Now you can see the back of my hand, but the front hasn't disappeared. You may be able to see one side, but the other side is right behind. That is the same with samatha and vipassana. You may think you're doing samatha, but right behind is vipassana. You may think you're doing vipassana, but right behind is samatha. The two always go together, because when you have insight, it solves all of your problems and you become very peaceful because of insight. For example, I was asked to tell again the story of the man who trod in the dog droppings, in the dog dirt. Have you ever trod in the dog dirt on your way home? What do? Do you scrape it off your shoes? If you do, that's the wrong way of dealing with dog dirt. If you are a Buddhist, you must always take the dog dirt home with you. And only scrape it off under the mango tree in your garden. Because if you scrape the dog dirt off under the mango tree in your garden, 1 year later, your mangoes are going to be sweeter and juicier than ever before. And you must always remember that when you're eating that juicy mango and the juice is dripping down your cheeks, you must remember what you are really eating. You're eating dog dirt. but it's been transformed into juicy mango. Now that is the insight into understanding how to deal with the problems of life. You may get sacked from your job. You may get separated, from your husband. All sorts of things happen to you in life. You may get cancer, or someone in your family might die. That's called stepping in the dog dirt. It's smelly, it's suffering, it's very difficult to bear. But if you have insight, you know how to dig it in to the garden of your heart, and 1 year later, your mangoes, your wisdom and compassion will be so much stronger than before that your life will be sweeter and juicier. You transform the dog dirt of life, death, disappointment, failure, into something which is sweet and wonderful. Wisdom and compassion. That is what we mean by insight. Can take some of the difficulties in life and transform them into something positive. That is called wisdom. So, wherever there is calm, you tend to see further and deeper than ever before. And you know it's insight because it solves the problems of your life. Even problems like the death of a loved one. Are you sad when a loved one dies? Why? My own father died when I was only 16 years of age. I loved my father very much. I admired him. He was my number 2 hero. My number 1 hero, the Buddha. My father was number 2. But I loved my father very, very much. And when he died, I never felt sad. At his funeral service, I never cried. I have never cried since. It was strange a 16-year-old would not feel grief. But what I felt was exactly the same that I felt after I went to listen to a great musical concert. As a young man growing up in London, I loved music. I would go to the Royal Albert Hall and many other places to listen to some of the greatest performers. I remember once going to a hall in the north of London and listening to a band. Only 6 people turned up to listen to that band. My brother and I were 2 of those. And I thought, why would any band play just for 6 people? But they did. Nowadays, you'll be lucky to get a seat amongst 6 or 10,000. The singer was called Rod Stewart. So I got private concert with Rod. And I always remember those concerts in London, especially when the concert finished. We would all stand up, clap, and shout for more. It was called the encore. And the band or orchestra would always play for a few more minutes. But then the time would come when the orchestra had to pack up their instruments and go home. And so did I. And for those of you who've been to London, if you go to a concert, when you walk out that concert hall, it's always freezing cold. It's usually raining. In England, in London, we call it drizzle. Even the word is very depressing. Drizzle. And even though the concert had ended, and I knew I would probably never hear that band or orchestra or performer again, even though the concert was over, never once did I cry after a great performance. Instead, I felt so grateful, so lucky to have been there and witnessed some of the greatest music of our time from the greatest performers. I felt so happy when I went out of that concert hall. And that was precisely how I felt when my father died. When I walked out of the crematorium in Mortlake, next to the River Thames in West London, it was like I had just been at a beautiful concert, which I would never forget, my father's life. I felt grateful to have had 16 years as a son of a marvelous man. Thank you so much, Father. It wasn't grief, it was gratitude. And it was a total different experience. So much so that I share that story when your father, a mother, or someone very close to you dies. It's like a great concert has finished. Very often you're there at the hospital by the bedside. Come on, Father, come on, Mother, keep on going. Give us an encore of 5 or 6 days if you can. But you know the day must come when your father, when your mother have to leave. And when they do, don't feel sad. Don't cry. Instead, thank you, Father. It's been such a gift to have you as my dad. Thank you, Mother. I will never forget all those sacrifices you made for me. I will always love you and remember you. Thank you. It's no longer grief. It's another emotion. the same emotion you will feel at the end of a great performance. Gratitude. That is an example of insight. It takes away the pain and suffering of life, and it replaces it for something much more beautiful. A sense of happiness, understanding, peace and freedom, which is wonderful to behold. It's the same as people who get so worried about the future, so worried about what might happen next, they can't enjoy what is happening now. I don't know how many of you are wondering what you're going to have for dinner this evening. It's not dinner time yet. When you're thinking about something else, you're not enjoying what you already have. This is the Buddha's Four Noble Truths in brief. When you want something else, you can't enjoy what you already have. Craving is a cause of suffering. And think about it. When you want something more, how can you enjoy what you already have? You have wonderful homes to stay with. A family. They're not the best, but they're good enough. Your wife. Not the best, but good enough. Your husband. Well, good enough. Your children. Sometimes you know they're more than good enough, but you never tell them that. And they're always struggling harder to please their parents. They don't need to. As I think an earlier story, it's told a couple of days ago, when I was a school teacher, I had to set an exam in mathematics. I'd never done that before. So I asked a senior teacher for advice, and he told me, don't make the exam too easy, because if every student gets 10 out of 10, 100% or 98%, the exam has no value. It's not worth anything. Don't make it too hard. If every student gets 30% or 40%, they would come away thinking maths is too hard and they can't do it. It will demoralize them, take away their confidence. So he taught me, please set the average score to be 70%. Because if the average score is 70%, most of the children will think, yes, that's a good score. I can do maths. I'm good at maths. It will motivate them to keep on going. And the 30% where they make mistakes is where I, as their teacher, can learn what they haven't understood yet. And I could talk about that in the next lessons. So he said 70% is the best score. And I realized that is the same in life. If you always score 100% in life, if you're always successful at everything you do, you don't learn anything at all. If you keep failing and only get 30, 40% in life, you probably get depressed. But if you just get 70% in life, you're doing well, you've got confidence. And the 30% where you make mistakes, where life is difficult, that is where you learn. That is where you grow. So if your husband is only 70%, he's the best you could possibly get. Now that is insight, because a lot of times people don't realize what perfection truly is. And we try too hard to be something we're not. That's not insight and understanding. A lot of people come to me because they are depressed and unhappy with how life has treated them. And they think they are not perfect, or their husband's not perfect. And I always ask them to go for a walk in the forest and try and find a perfect tree. One which is perfectly straight, not bent, not crooked, perfectly straight, with all the branches equally spaced, with all the leaves green, no yellow, no brown leaves, with no scars on the trunk, on the bark. If you can find a tree like that, you'll be the first person in the world to find such a tree. And such a tree is not beautiful. For me, when I walk in the forest, all the trees are crooked and bent. They're leaning all over the place. They've got branches missing. They've got scars on the bark, yellow leaves and brown leaves. They are the beautiful trees in the forest. They're the ones I like to sit underneath, the crooked ones and the bent ones. So if you have got a husband who is crooked and bent, he is beautiful. He belongs to one of the natural, beautiful trees in the forest. Keep him. Because you are crooked and bent too. There's an old story of a young man in Australia. He was so brilliant that he went to university, he got PhD. He was tall, blonde, blue-eyed. He was a very cute guy. And his parents were rich and gave him a lot of money. He thought to himself, I am so perfect. I want to marry a beautiful woman. So he looked all around Australia, tried to find a perfect woman to marry. He found a very beautiful girl, but he couldn't marry her because she couldn't cook. So he went to England, and there he found a girl who owned her own restaurant, even more beautiful than the girl in Australia. And he thought, I can't marry her either, because she was stupid. And then he came to Colombo. And there he found the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen in his life. And she was the manager of 3 restaurants. She could cook. And she also had 2 PhDs, one from Cambridge, one from Harvard. She was brilliant. She was so perfect he decided to marry her. But she wouldn't marry him, because she was looking for the perfect guy. How do you expect your husband to be perfect when you're not perfect? So the one you've got is good enough. This is insight. You know that some years ago, sisters, and they came to get counseling from the monk. You know why people come to ask their problems of the bhikkhus, of the monks? The reason is because we're cheap. You go to a professional counselor and you have to pay a lot of money. You go to a monk, a little bit of pirikira, and you can talk to them for hours. Good value for money. So they came to us for counseling. And I asked the elder sister, first of all, what is your problem? And she said, my husband. And many of you married can understand this. She said, I've got a husband, he's driving me crazy. I don't know whether I should separate or not. So, I had to talk her into keeping her husband. It's very difficult to do sometimes. And then I talked to her sister, and her sister was single. She was trying so hard to find a guy to share her life with. And she could never find one. She could maybe, go out for a few weeks, but then it would all break down. So when she said this, I thought of a solution. Your sisters, it's family. Your elder sister's got a husband she doesn't want. You want one. Swap. To a monk, that made a lot of sense. To you guys, you think that's weird. But then afterwards, I told them, insight, wisdom. I said, you elder sister, you have got what we call husband suffering. That's what it's like when you have a husband. It's really difficult to deal with. But I told the elder sister, if you separate and divorce from your husband, you won't have that type of suffering, that type of dukkha anymore. You'll have what your sister has, single woman suffering. We always think if we change our job, change our partner, we'll get rid of the problem. You don't. You just change one type of suffering for another type of suffering. And then I told the two of them, if you decide to renounce and become a nun, you won't have married woman suffering, you won't have single woman suffering, you'll have monk suffering. Because I remember that's what I had when I was young monk. When I was young monk, I was really thin and bony. Because all the best dana, all the best food went to the senior monks. And the little novices at the end of we got nothing. And I thought that was so unfair. Because all the senior monks, I thought they're already arahat. They don't need nice food. I am still got defilements. I've still got craving. Give the nice food to me and give them the leftovers. And also, you see this in the temple here in Sri Lanka. All the senior monks, they get the big seats. The really fat cushions. When you're a senior monk, you don't need fat cushions. You have your own upholstery. So I looked at all those senior monks and thought, I want to be a senior monk one day, because being a junior monk, you had junior monk suffering. Now I'm a senior monk. I get good food, I get thick cushions, but now I have senior monk suffering. I have to give talks all day, and people come and tell me their problems. They keep telling me about marriage problems. I'm a monk. What do I know about marriage? I became a monk to get rid of all of that. Now you come and tell me my husband did this, my wife does that, blah, 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 blah. But now I have senior monk suffering. But what real suffering is, the insight says, is not trying to change the world. You try and change the world, change your situation, get rid of your husband, change your wife, you don't get rid of suffering. You change your wife and get another one, I will tell you the secret. All women are the same. Don't think there is something wrong with the one you've got. Yeah, they get a different chassis, but the engine is the same. So, changing the world doesn't get rid of suffering. Changing your attitude does. Changing the way you look at things. That is what insight is all about. So don't try and think you're going to end suffering by changing your job, changing your partner, changing your children, or changing the place you live. You change suffering by changing your attitude. Whenever there's any difficulty in life, that is like the dog droppings, the dog dirt. That is fertilizer for your compassion and wisdom. So when you see any dog dirt in life, please collect it. Take it home and dig it under your mango trees. You grow enormously that way. And when there's no dog dirt around, you can enjoy your life. There was once an emperor who was a very young man who, when things were going well in the kingdom, would always celebrate. He would always have festivals, like Poson for days, like Wesak for days, was always having holidays because things were going well. There was no wars, economy was going well, and had festivals. And that meant the prosperity never lasted very long. And when there was difficulties in the kingdom, the emperor was so upset, he spent too many hours in his room being depressed, which meant he was not working hard enough for his country. Now, if you're a minister in the government, it's very hard to tell the king what to do. You have to be sneaky to be able to give advice to a leader. And the ministers were sneaky enough that they came up with a great idea. They made a ring, a gold ring, which they presented to their young king. It was a simple ring except for the words engraved on the outside. The words were, "This too will pass. This too will pass." And that emperor had to wear the ring on all occasions. So when there was any problem in the kingdom, any wars, any difficulties with the economy, he would look at that ring and say, "This too will pass." He never lost hope. He kept on working, even in the most difficult times, which meant the difficult times never lasted that long. But even more importantly, when there was prosperity and happiness and peace in the kingdom, he'd also look at that ring. "This too will pass." So he worked even harder when there was prosperity and very few problems, which meant the prosperity and peace lasted longer than anyone ever expected. And that became a very wise and beloved leader. Our problem is, when we have difficulties in life, we get so depressed and upset, we don't do anything except complain. No, when it's difficulties, that is dog droppings, dog dirt. You have work to do. Dig it in. And when life is going well, a lovely family, your business is going well, you've got good health, do not take it for granted. Still work hard so the prosperity, the happiness and health lasts longer than you'd ever expect. That is insight. Our problem is, when life gets difficult, we get so upset we don't do anything to help the problem. When life is going well, we take it for granted. We don't do anything to keep the happiness, health, prosperity going for a long, long, long time. So that is the insight of the emperor's ring. This too will pass. Even when you get sick, what's a problem being sick? It will pass. Many years ago, I was very sick in Thailand. I had typhus fever, which comes from a little insect, a little mite in the forest, which bites you, infects you, and you get symptoms exactly the same as typhoid. Very high fever, and you get very sick. And I went to this hospital in Thailand. This was almost 40 years ago, in the monks' ward. And that was so basic. They would give me injections twice a day in my bottom. In those days, they did not have disposable needles. They were all recycled. They used them in Bangkok first. Then they sent them to the provinces. And last of all, they used them on the monks because we were tough. And this is no joke. The nurse who would come to inject me twice a day, she was built like a water buffalo. Really strong, because they never injected you. They took the needle, bang, stabbed you. And even with all my compassion, with all the metta, I hated that nurse. My bottom was so sore. And That's a true story, no exaggeration. I'm an old monk, remember? Old monks don't lie. And my teacher, my master, Ajahn Brahm, came to visit me. And I was just a small monk. This was such a famous teacher. He came to visit me in hospital. Oh, I felt so happy to see my teacher. Straight away, it was encouraging me. I felt uplifted. I was so happy and proud that he had found time to visit me. And all that happiness only lasted until he told me some advice. He came to me, absolutely true. He said, Brahma Wangso, you're either going to get better or you're going to die. And then he left. The trouble was, it was so true. You don't get sick forever. Either you get better or you die. Either way, sickness passes. This too will pass. So if you see your old grandmother or father in hospital, they're very sick, please go up to them and say, no, don't do that. But isn't that true? Doesn't matter how sick you are, you either get better or you pass away. The sickness pain doesn't last. You know, that's quite a relief after a while to know that. Because it's understanding, impermanence. Nothing ever lasts. So not even your relationships. So if you understand things don't last, it's like the simile of a glass. You see this glass? It's cracked. There's a crack in here. It's invisible, but one day someone is going to drop this glass, the crack is going to open up, and the glass is going to shatter. It's fragile. Because I know this glass is fragile, that one day it will break, that is why I care for it. I look after it, because I know it's going to break one day. If this was plastic, like we have many plastic glasses these days, I could drop it, I could kick it, it wouldn't matter, because the glass would be unbreakable. But because it's fragile, that is why I must care. Each one of you is like this glass. You are fragile. Because you're fragile, that is why you must care for each other. If you weren't going to die or get sick, you would not need to care so much. Because one day you'll be separated from the people you love, your little children, mother and father. Because you're fragile, that is why we must care. When you understand that, that's insight. You're not always going to be together. There comes a day when we have to part. And when that time comes, if you have cared for one another, just like me and my father, when we've cared for each other so well, when that day comes, it's like a great concert has ended with no regrets. What a wonderful time we've had together. Thank you so much. We part with happiness rather than with sadness. We've known all along the relationships, husbands and wives, parents and children, it cannot last forever. We understand that, we learn from it, we enjoy our time together like a great concert. When it's time to leave one another, we leave with peace and gratitude, never with tears. So these are some of the insights which you get simply by meditating and having a clear mind. When a leaf falls from the tree in the forest, there's so many other leaves and twigs in the forest, you cannot make out one from the other. But when you have a clear path, swept of all the leaves and twigs, when one leaf falls on that path, it stands out. There's no other leaves to confuse it. When one leaf falls, you can see it, contemplate it, and understand it. That is like the emotions of our life. We have so many, we are like the cluttered forest floor, so many twigs and leaves, we can hardly understand any one of them. But if you have a peaceful, still mind, it's like a cleanly swept path in the forest. The first leaf which falls down, it's only one leaf. You can see it, contemplate it, understand it. When your mind is still and peaceful, just one emotion, one idea, one event arises. You can understand it and contemplate it because it's not complicated with all the other events of your life. That is why when you're peaceful and when you're still, that is when there's not so many things to complicate your life, and you can understand life with greater insight. It is why when the mind is still, you can see things as they truly are. Life is not confusing when only one leaf falls at a time. So that's one of the reasons why Buddhist monks, even though they've never been married, understand more about marriage than anybody else. That is why I get to give talks on marriage. And I have been a monk for over 40 years. Even IT, computing. I don't know anything about computing, but still, I got invited a few years ago to give a keynote address at the World Computer Conference. How do I do that? It's because my mind is so clear, one thing comes up and you can understand it fully. Even I was invited as a member of the public once to a conference on transport in Western Australia, on how the best use of roads, rail and shipping could be legislated for the best economical advantage of the country. And during lunch, they had their lunch, and I couldn't have lunch because it was after 12 o'clock. So a reporter came to interview me. It was for a shipping company. And they asked me, Ajahn Brahm, meditating monk, about my advice on shipping. I know nothing about shipping, but that didn't stop me answering all his questions. And I saw him 3 months later, and he came to tell me that that article which he wrote was syndicated in all the major shipping publications of the world. And he got all these emails back from these professors and experts on shipping saying, we have never heard of this Ajahn Brahm before, but he certainly knows what he's talking about. And that's true. When your mind is still and peaceful, it's amazing what insight you have and how you can give advice on almost anything, even to governments, on how to govern. It's amazing just what a Buddhist monk can do when they have insight. For example, on governing a country. Now, how can we have a little bit more peace and harmony in our parliaments? Now, number one, I've given this advice to parents. I think I gave this morning about reconciling, about when you argue, you can always come together. Have I given that advice? Yeah. Learning how to reconcile together. Learning, just like that story of, you know that Buddhist story about the elephant and the blind men? Have you ever heard the story of the blind elephants and the man? Once there were 7 blind elephants. And the 7 blind elephants were talking together, and they said, we've always heard about this thing called a man, a man, a man. But we've been blind, so we don't know what a man is. So they always thought, well, let's all find a man each No, feel the man and come back together to decide what a man is. So they all went to find a man, and when they came back, they all agreed, a man is flat. The only way an elephant knows to feel something is to squash it. But I told that story once to Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd, all the leaders of the Australian government some time ago, because they thought it was funny, but it was also emphasizing the real story of the elephant. Don't argue who's right and who's wrong. Compare notes. Now, you've all heard the story of the 7 blind men and the elephant. I call it now, because they have to change the stories to make them interesting, the 7 blind men and the kangaroo. The 7 blind men had already heard, kangaroo, kangaroo. They'd never seen a kangaroo. So they went to Australia, to Ajahn Brahm's monastery with many kangaroos. They're Buddhist kangaroos now. True, Buddhist kangaroos. No, a Christian kangaroo puts their paws like this. And a Buddhist kangaroo doesn't. So, they wanted to find out what a kangaroo is. So one of them felt the tail, because they were blind. And they said, kangaroo is like snake. Because actually, if you feel the tail, it's like a nice soft snake. And the one felt the little baby in the pouch. And they said, a kangaroo has got 2 heads. One in the bottom, one in the top. And the other one put their hand inside the pouch and said, a kangaroo is a lady's handbag. One of them felt the legs. If you look at a kangaroo's legs, it's always bent. Said, kangaroo is a boomerang. One of them felt the paws. And they said, the paws are so soft, they're like the flower. There's something called a kangaroo paw. It's like a flower in the front. And they got a head which is really pointy. What could that be like? Anyway, you can imagine something it might be like. And so they met together. Instead of arguing, they put that together and said, that's what a kangaroo is like. When we combine our wisdom, rather than arguing with each other, we always get the bigger picture, which is one of the reasons why politicians should always start the day reminding themselves about the 7 blind men and the elephant. And they would have a much more harmonious parliament. But also a democracy. Is it really a democracy? Have a think about it. Sometimes very old people, there may be 80, 85, 90, they also have the same vote as a 20-year-old. They're 85, they're 90, they're going to be out of here soon. Whatever they vote for, they're never going to get the results of it. It's like if you have shares in a company, the more shares you have, the more votes you have. Isn't that true? So a 20-year-old, they've got maybe 60 or 70 years to live in life. They've got more shares in life. So your vote should decrease the older you are, because you don't have so much investment in this life. 20-year-olds should get the most votes, because they've got many, many more years in this life. Old people, maybe 1 or 2 votes, because they're out of here soon. Would that change the way democracy works? Interesting idea. Religious harmony in our world. I was mentioning this, to one of the politicians here. What is the cause for religious disharmony in this country and many other countries? One of the reasons is because we have separate schools. Buddhists go to one schools, Muslims go to another schools, Christians go to another schools. So it means we don't meet each other. We don't play sport together. We don't understand each other. And that separates peoples of our world. I think that we should ban all religious schools and have people of all religion going to the same school, playing cricket together, soccer together. If your friend, one friend is a Buddhist, another friend is a Muslim, another friend is a Christian, you get to know each other and understand each other, you're friends together, and that understanding takes away all of the misunderstandings and hatred which cause divisions in our society. Can't we please learn together, grow together, be friends together, and have harmony in our world? If we separate children from an early age, it's a cause for disharmony. It's easy for me as a monk to see that. I grew up in a multicultural school because it was a poor area, many migrants, with Sri Lankans, Indians, South Africans, Jamaicans. They were my friends. I became what's called colorblind. I didn't care where you came from, what your religion was. If you could play soccer, you were in my team. You were my friend. Now that's how we can create some harmony in this world. So all this insight, this actually comes from a peaceful mind, because in a peaceful mind you can see much deeper. But of course we want the insight also in how to be free from our defilements and suffering. I already mentioned how to be free from the suffering of marriage. The one you've got is good enough. You try and swap them, you're just the same trouble again. So the one you've got, keep them and work with them and learn a lot. If there's a lot of trouble, your husband, your wife, it's a lot of trouble for you, you've got more dog dirt than your friends. So your mangoes will be much sweeter if you know how to dig it in. But many people here also want to know about the insight which leads to things like so on. And this is the deep insights which you can only get with deep stillness. Once there was a tadpole, and the tadpole grew up in the water, and in the pond it went to tadpole school. And in tadpole school, the little tadpole learned chemistry. She loved chemistry, and even she did so well in tadpole school, she went to Tadpole University and majored in chemistry. Even in Tadpole University they had a Buddhist club, and she learned the Abhidhamma to understand what water was. She was an expert on water, so much so that when she graduated she lectured in water. But how can a tadpole really know what water is? A tadpole cannot understand water no more than a fish can understand water. Born in it, lived in it, grown up with it, water is always there all its life. How can a tadpole understand what water is, even though it learns and reads about water? But the difference between a fish and a tadpole is one day the tadpole grows legs and arms, and little tadpole becomes a frog. And one day the frog jumps out of the lake and is standing on dry land. That is very strange. The frog has never experienced anything like that in its life before. Something is missing. Something which was always been there is now absent. Water. Only now can the frog understand what water is. Once it has disappeared. That is why jhanas are absolutely necessary for insight. In the jhanas, it's something totally different than anything you've ever experienced before. Totally different. Something is missing, which has always been there for you. In the first jhana, what is missing is your body and the 5 senses. Do you think a doctor understands what the body is? Do you think a psychologist knows what the 5 senses are? They can study it, but they don't truly know until your body and the five senses totally disappear. That's what happens in the jhanas. In the second jhana, something else disappears, which is even more strange. In the second jhana, your will vanishes. Do you know what this thing is, which makes all the choices, which decides where you go and what you do? This thing called Chaitanya or will. How can you understand it when it's always there? You are like a fish trying to understand water. You don't understand what your will is. In fact, each one of you cherishes your will as your most private and sacred possession. I choose what I will do. You've all heard the Buddha talk about anatta. There's no one in here. So who do you think is making all these choices? The Buddha has given you a clue, but there's no way you can really understand that until your will totally vanishes. It's not that you have a will, you decide not to use it. That is different. The will is there, you just decide not to use it. But here, the will has totally vanished. It's not there anymore. Only in those jhanas can you really understand what your will is. And I will tell you what the Buddha said, the will is not yours, and it's the greatest cause of suffering. It is, as the Buddha called, the house builder, the sankhara. But you cherish your will. And many people, especially in Western countries, they come to Buddhist temples not to get rid of their will, not to understand it, but to try and train their will to be smarter. So that if you get some wisdom, you can make good choices and have no suffering. Not realizing the will is the main culprit. That is what keeps you suffering. That is why you find it difficult to let go in meditation. This will not leave you alone. So in meditation we trick you into letting go, into suppressing the will until it gets so still it disappears. And the trick is the happiness. It's so happy to let go. It's so enjoyable. You let go a little bit more, you get a bit more happy, let go a little bit more, even more happy, till you get so happy you can let go so much, you get into jhanas, and there's no more will left. It's gone. That is why these jhanas are so incredibly still. There's nothing to move you. The will has disappeared for a long while. When you come out of the jhanas, that is such a strange state. When you look back upon it afterwards, just like the frog, now jump back in the lake, something happened. Something was missing. Now you can understand what the will is. What is it? Impermanent, anicca, comes and disappears. It is suffering, dukkha, nothing to be cherished or kept. It is not mine. You don't own your will. Ask any psychologist, especially anyone in advertising. They manipulate your will. When I was young, I always remember seeing one of these stupid advertisements when I was at university. I still remember it to this day. It was for St. Bruno tobacco. The advertisement was this was an ordinary looking guy. He was walking down some street in England, and he took out a pipe, the old-fashioned pipes, put some Bruno tobacco in and lit it. And then the aroma from the tobacco passed this shop. And inside the shop was this beautiful blonde. And as soon as she smelt the fragrance of the tobacco, she was enchanted. And she left the shop and followed this guy, waiting to perform his every command. And then he went past a newsagent. There was this gorgeous redhead. She smelt the tobacco and she was entranced too and followed the guy. After only 1 minute in this advertisement, this ordinary looking guy had all these amazing hot women following him. Because the advert was, St. Bruno tobacco makes you irresistible to the opposite sex. It was stupid, wasn't it? Who would believe an advertisement like that? Me. Because I brought some. Brought a pipe, put it in the pipe, lit it, and I walked down the street. The only person following me was a dog. That is how your will gets controlled by other people. That's absolutely very scary. Why you do the things you do, you think you're in charge, but you are not in charge. One of the other scary things which I saw when I was at university, we had a hypnotist would come once a year to actually show us the nature of the mind in hypnotism. And you know, if you've ever seen a professional hypnotist, especially when you're a group of students who are willing to volunteer for anything. I volunteered, but I was not a good hypnotic subject. But in the lecture hall of maybe 100, there was always one man who was very easy to hypnotize. And this hypnotist got him to do some amazing stupid things, like take down his trousers. Now, we're only students, we thought that was very funny. But the most fascinating thing was the hypnotist told this young man that later on, when the hypnotist touched his right ear, that this young man would stand up and sing the British national anthem in a loud voice, no matter what was going on. And I wondered whether this guy would do that. And the hypnotist took him out of hypnosis. And later on, during the lecture, we were all waiting for him to touch his ear, because he told the young man, no, you'd forget what I'd said, but when I touch my ear, you'll stand up and sing the national anthem. And that's exactly what happened. In the middle of the lecture, the hypnotist touched his ear, and this young man stood up and sang the British national anthem from beginning to end. Well, all of us, the other 99 people in the audience, were laughing and jeering at this guy for doing something really ridiculous. And when he finished, and we finished laughing, the hypnotist asked him, why did you do that? And this young man gave a legitimate reason why he felt he needed to sing the national anthem. To us it became very clear that you cannot distinguish between a hypnotic suggestion and your own free will. They are the same. And I started to imagine, what will of mine is free, and what has been conditioned by the St. Bruno tobacco ads, by everything else which I have learned? Where does my will come from? If you get into jhanas, it will be spooky. You will find that your will does not come from you. It is totally conditioned. It's conditioned by your parents, by your teachers, by what you see, by what you read. Once you understand how powerful that conditioning is, you understand why your children might take drugs or alcohol. Because they see others do that. You can see why you can protect your children by protecting them from bad peer pressure. They can't resist it. It's hard to choose because all your will is conditioned by your friends, by the TV, by the internet. That's what conditions you. As for me, why do I say these things? Because I was totally conditioned by my master Ajahn Chah. If I teach you the Dhamma, it's not my fault, it's Ajahn Chah. What conditioned him? His teacher. Who conditioned him? It goes right back to the Buddha. He's responsible for everything I say. I've got no choice. He conditioned his disciples, who conditioned their disciples. It comes down to conditioning me. But what's really scary is when you get into jhana, only then can you understand what this will is, that it's nothing to do with you. Only then, when your consciousness starts to disappear, can you understand the one who is listening to me right now, that's not a person. That's not who you are. Only when things disappear can you fully understand them. That is the purpose of the jhanas. To have things which have been there all the time, like water for a fish, vanish, so at last you can understand them. And what do you understand? Anicca. They're not permanent. You can only see anicca when things vanish. Things which are always there, like the air around you, you can't understand the air because it's always there. It's only when it disappears, when you go underwater, can you understand what the absence of air does to you. Only when things vanish can you understand their nature. In jhanas, many things vanish. It's scary, but it's the only way you can understand what these things are. Your body, the five senses, consciousness, will. The only way you can understand that is when they vanish. That's what jhanas are. Anicca, something there, now gone. Dukkha, you cannot understand how much irritation this body is until it vanishes. You cannot understand how much suffering the will is until it disappears. It's like you're born in a prison, and the prison has 5 walls called the 5 senses, and you have a guard who keeps on making you do things. Get up, sit down, come here, go there. That prison guard is the will. And because you've been born in prison, lived all your life in prison, you don't realize it's prison. You find another nice girl or boy in prison and marry them, start a family in prison, decorate your prison cells, visit other prisons, they have cricket match in prison, and you think that's a wonderful world. But you're in prison. And one day you manage to get out from those 5 prison walls and find out what it's like outside of prison, where there's no will, there's no senses. You're free at last. That's why the jhana experiences are blissful, ecstatic, because dukkha, a lot of it has vanished. Then you understand the 4 Noble Truths, what suffering truly is. And also, you get so, consciousness starts to disappear. And when it disappears, you understand what this consciousness is, what this mind is. It's not you. It's just a process. It arises, it vanishes. It is subject to cessation. In other words, you understand what Nibbana is. Will ceasing forever. Stillness. Consciousness ceasing forever. Nibbana. Finished. You do need that to become a soul. And I cannot understand how anyone can be a soul without jhanas. It's one of the reasons why there are few soul ones in Sri Lanka today, because jhana is not practiced, is not encouraged, is not taught. So that is my mission, to teach those jhanas. They are not that difficult if you follow the instructions. And once you get those jhanas, you have all the data, all the possibilities of seeing the truth of who you are and what you're not, and becoming a soul one. And only then will Buddhism flourish again in this island. We have many soul ones just like in the time of the Buddha. Many Sakadagamis, Anagamis, not just bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, upasikas and upasikas, just like in the time of the Buddha. Thank you.